This is a 1966 MGB Roadster, a car that we bought about 16 years ago. It's unrestored, which is why you can see bits of rust on it and perhaps different coloured paint. But it was born the same year I was born. It's an Aston Martin DB7 under there, which I bought in 2003. And here is a 1925 Bullnose Morris. So it's a Morris Cowley, named Bullnose because it's got a beautiful round radiator on the front. This is a fantastic car. There have been 6 owners prior to me in its 96-year life. It starts instantly on the button, and we used it last year for Abby's wedding. This is a BSA Bantam D1 motorbike, KTR 602. This was Uncle Jim's. Found in his shed back in 2012, taken to Rob for restoration. Rob sadly was not well enough to do the job, but he looked after it until last year, and we recovered it when his estate was sent to auction. This is a bioscope. A bioscope was an early cinema projector. This is my granddad's, and he used this in Victorian London to project early films, right through to about 1910, I think. This is a wheel which came from the original Hurston Lloyd car. This is the new museum which I've created in the last 6 weeks to hold the family memorabilia. Over here is the bookcase that once lived in 28 Sussex Place, which was originally known as 7 Little Sussex Place, which is on the corner of Hyde Park and in the borough of Paddington. On the mantelpiece are 2 vases that have been converted to lights, and the picture is the original hand-coloured image of Jane Rhind. And Jane Rhind was born at 7 Little Sussex Place, which was a post office. Her father was Charles Rhind, who was the first postmaster of Paddington, and prior to that, amongst a number of jobs, I think he was reported to be, in a number of papers, a king's messenger. Now we think that may have been quite simply a postman. However, he's got journeys charted in his diary of leaving Paris and travelling to King Otto in Greece and back to Portsmouth and back to London in 1835, 1836. So he had quite a good job, whatever it was he did, and at some point we'll get to the bottom of it, I'm sure. Here's a family reunion photo. We had a family reunion in the year 2000 at Wilsford-cum-Lake, and that house in the background belongs to the musician Sting. My dear Uncle Jim is here. This is a little display in dedication to him. Jim died in May last year, May the 10th, 2020, and in his will left a request that we write the story of the family history, and we produce a book and we give everybody a copy. We have done that, and this weekend, it's Bank Holiday August, by the way, we had a family reunion here and we gave everybody a book. Here's some of the cameras that would have been used by our grandparents, and this beautiful fire guard was made by my grandfather Charles Rhind-Tutt. His father Tom Tutt, who married Jane Rhind and started the family name, and there's a picture of him, wore a top hat, and there we believe is his top hat. His wife Jane was a wonderful, what's the word I want to use? She did tapestries, and this is a sampler from when she was just 7 years old, writing a message to her mother. A display case here holds lots of family history. So the post office, which was started in 1838, there's a stationery box from the post office. scales from the post office, a photo album from my grandfather, who was a very keen photographer, and what we're seeing here is photographs through his eyes. Salisbury Cathedral featuring their Queen Victoria in a carriage, and photos of Stapleford. We've identified all of the photos and who is in most of the photos. Charles Rhind-Tutt, my granddad, had many overseas trips and holidays in very early days, early 1900s. They were believed to be friends with W.H. Smith and Thomas Cook, or the descendants of, and we can see from some of the photos and some of the documents they brought back from the holidays that they went to some pretty spectacular places, including Geneva. My granddad, Charles Rhind-Tutt, was a master carpenter and cabinet maker, and we think this little piece with E, M and CRT on was built by made by one of his children as a sample piece, apprentice piece to show their dad. The pocket watch belonged to Charlie Rhind-Tutt, who was my cousin Rob's father and my uncle. The Spitfire is symbolic because Charlie was killed in one of the earliest air raids on Britain during the Battle of Britain. It was the 11th of September 1940, and he worked at the Spitfire factory in Southampton, which was called Cunliffe Owen. And at that time, there was a bombing raid. I think it was in the morning, and 52 people were killed, including my Uncle Charlie, and that was his watch. This beautiful fruit bowl, and there's the markings on the bottom of it, came from France. It's dated about 1890, which ties up quite nicely with the 1891 silver wedding anniversary of Tom and Jane, where they received some beautiful gifts. So we think it's possibly a wedding anniversary gift. We had cards a visit, so visitors cards, 2 collections of those we found in the archives, and these are all handwritten cards that have been gifted to the post office over the years. And look, there's one from David Livingstone. All of them are relatively famous people, and certainly most of them feature in Wikipedia. Should add that the post office was frequented by Charles Dickens and Winston Churchill. There's Thomas Tutt's deed box from 7 Little Sussex Place. And here's another stationery box. This is from a company called Parkins and Gotto with a photo album. And Parkins and Gotto were a very well-known, respected stationer supplier based in Oxford Street in London. And Thomas Tutt, who was born in 1840, started his career there as an apprentice stationer. And it was there where he met Jane, his wife-to-be, who was collecting stationery for the post office. So it's a really beautiful piece, which was made by Parkins and Gotto, and for which Thomas had and is featured in one of the photographs taken at Sussex Place in later years. Pictures on the wall are my grandfather's works outings. So here's an early one, horse-driven, and here's a later one, probably around about 1910, 1912. Grandad's in the middle here. We coloured the picture in, and there are some of his staff. We have actually got all of the names of those people, and we've got all of their salaries and what they did. Here's a coloured image of my grandfather driving the Hurst and Lloyd car that we saw outside. That's in Hyde Park, and that's August 1902. The person next to him was a chap called Bunce, B-U-N-C-E, and there was a family of Bunces there was a nanny that looked after my granddad when he was born, and then there were children born about the same age as my grandfather, and they grew up and worked with the family for many, many years. And this chap was the mechanic, so he looked after my grandfather's fleet of vehicles, of which there were a lot. display here of family history and some of the stuff that's reached the press over the years. And then we've got the display cabinet for the car parts. So this holds many of the parts from the Hurst and Lloyd car, which I've managed to collect over a number of years from various uncles and aunties and bring back together. And the desire is, as I said earlier, to rebuild the car. Here's the original maker's plate, which came off the car. Uncle Richard had that, and my dear Aunt Sylvia handed it across to me through Stuart in 2019 with the spark plug. That's the medal that is given to participants of the London Brighton Run. That was from 1908. It's not my grandfather's, but it's just showing what the medal was like. Grandad took part, as I said, in 2 or 3 races. His car was named Philo, and it lined up alphabetically with a car called Petrels. And you wouldn't even imagine why it was called Petrels until you saw the name of the owner. And the name of the owner was the Honourable C.S. Rolls. And of course it wasn't Petrels, it was Pet Rolls. This is probably 10 years before Rolls-Royce was founded. Grandad was one of the first people to have a driving licence. This is his driving licence, dated 1903. It's late December 1903, in advance of the first driving licence ever issued, which was scheduled to be the 1st of January 1904. His number was A408, and his number plate was A448. And that ended up on a Didion Bouton. And the Didion Bouton was bought from my grandmother a long time after my grandfather died in 1956. And it's been restored, and it's still in existence today, carrying that number. There's a Speedo from a vintage car that Grandad had. It possibly went on the Hurst and Lloyd, but I doubt it. It's probably more likely to have been on one of the Didions. A fuel tank. These are the headlight and rear lights of the Hurst and Lloyd. They came off the Hurst and Lloyd. And this is one of Grandad's lanterns, his personal lanterns, and you'll see it's stamped C.R. Tutt all over. And it's beautiful, bevel glass, copper lantern, his torch. That's the trade press photo of Grandad's car, which was used for advertising. Here's the newspaper. Well, it was called the Car Illustrated, and that's the August the 20th, 1902. And there's Grandad top left in his car. His AA book from 1911. Horns, trembler coil, pump for pumping up the car, and petrol cans. And now we go into the snooker room, and I'll just take you over here. Here is a photograph of Thomas Tutt, our great grandfather, born in 1840. This picture was taken about 1869, and we have had it coloured. And up until this year, we had no idea whether that was our granddad or our great uncle, George Rhind-Tutt, until Daniel spotted that the age of the photo and the style would have been more fitting to be their father. And sure enough, it is. And here's his wife, Jane, again, coloured photo, born in 1843. And then amongst the photos that Jim had, we found this one. And this is Thomas Tutt's brother, Francis Mandrel Tutt, born in Wishford, as was Thomas, and his wife, Mary Boone. So this is also taken by the same photographer at the same time. In the middle, I mentioned earlier that Jane was wonderful at tapestry, and here's a tapestry that she's done. And this features in photographs we've got of Little Sussex Place from the early 1900s or the late 1890s. Jane died in 1899, so this was made sometime in the Victorian era. We're not sure the date, but it's amazing. And then finally, on the table is the family tree. This family tree was put together in 1997. It holds the names and the details of 111 descendants of Thomas and Jane. And today, 30th of August 2021, there are 169 descendants. So there'll be a new tree produced at some stage soon. And that's my little museum.